All right, so good evening. Thank you. I know it was round two. It didn't get as much response. So I think I'll be good with the lesson. My voice is a little bit rough. I was sick. I'm good, but I don't sound good. If it is a problem, I have a volunteer to read scripture if need be, but we'll see what happens. I think it should be okay. Just bear with me. Okay, so I believe we're going to be getting right back on track. We've been slightly behind of the schedule that I had figured out to get us through Genesis by the end of the season. I think we'll be good. So last week, we talked about two main things. We talked about Jacob stealing the blessing, and we talked about him running for his life, which results in the Jacob's ladder dream incident. All right, so that's last week. It's pretty simple. Today, we have a lot of ground to cover, so we actually will be using the book a few times because yeah, I know, right? You forgot you had them. Because the book does really good, just quick synopses of what's happening. So we'll actually end up skipping a little bit of text in favor of the book's overview on certain parts, and then we'll dig deep on other parts. So this week we're going to be looking at Jacob marrying and having children. We're going to see Jacob prosper financially, and we're going to see Jacob return home. That's the goal. It's a lot of material, but I don't have too many pages of notes. We should be able to do it. Okay? Okay. Why don't we open up in prayer and we can jump in. Lord, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for this time that we can get together and study your word. We just pray you would be with us during this time. Pray you would open our eyes, open our minds to what truth you have for us in your word. And we thank you for it. Again, pray you'd be with us. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, so we're going to be in Genesis 29 tonight. We're going to be doing chapters 29 through 31, hopefully. So we remember where we left off. Like I said, Jacob's ladder. That was the key event. He was in Bethel, as he has been told to go and stay with his mother's people, Abraham's extended family, I guess you could say. So he's on the run. Esau wants to kill him. He took a stop in Bethel, and then he moves on. So we're going to read Genesis 29, and we're going to do verses 1 through 30. Genesis 29:1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. And a great stone was upon the well's mouth, and thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone away from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place. Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And behold, Rachel, his daughter, cometh with the sheep. And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is there time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. And they said, We cannot until all the flocks be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the mouth's well. Then we water the sheep. And while he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban his mother's brother, the sheep of Laban his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. And it came to pass, when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. Laban said unto him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldst thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. Laban said, It is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her. Jacob said unto Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. Laban gathered together all the men of the place, and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for a handmaid. It came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? Laban said, It must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and I will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. All right, so we may or may not be familiar with this story. If you've heard it in like a Sunday school context, certain details may be left out, certain phrasings of things. It's weird, not denying that for a second. It sort of takes several left turns as it goes about. What are your opening thoughts with this? Yeah, we see the hospitality continue. That's the same kind of thing that we've seen all throughout. So he shows up, explains who he is, and Laban, that's the interesting thing about Laban. What we've seen of him up until he deceives him, he's been good. He was for Rebekah marrying Isaac back in the day. Same, that's Rebekah's brother. He said, oh, well, God has clearly put this together. We can't say anything against it. He immediately takes in Jacob, provides for him for a month, and then decides not only is it's not like, oh, now you have to start paying rent. It's like, oh, no, you're doing work for me for free. We're family. You can't, what do you think your wages should be? And then this whole thing gets set in motion. He seems really good in every way you want him to be, right up until he pulls a very fast one. Okay, so yeah, I only had a few things because most of the text is straightforward, and then some of it is very not straightforward. Okay, so in the text, so verse 10 I thought was kind of funny. So they have this situation that he stumbles upon sheep in the field, not out of the ordinary. But apparently there's a very large stone that they keep over the well. That's actually pretty normal. You keep the well covered. And I guess at the end of the day, some commentators think that maybe the shepherds that were already there, maybe they were young, some of the older, young teen children, because they seem incapable of moving this stone even though they're there with their sheep. I don't know, could be. But they're basically saying, okay, it's like midday. They're not technically that's not the normal time to water the sheep, but they seem unable to move the stone to do that. And then when he sees Rachel coming, Verse 10, came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near, rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So it's kind of funny because, well, one, there's definitely a little bit of like his mother's situation going on here when she watered all the camels of Isaac's servant. There's a little bit of a parallel going on. But also, even though he is partly fleeing for his life, he was also told to go to this area and find a wife of Abraham's people. And when he sees this attractive person who fits that description coming, he decides to be very helpful and show how strong he is. So like, okay, good first impression. And then verse 11, Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. So he immediately, good first impression, weird second impression, because he does not know Rachel. He knows that she is technically she's in the lineage of Abraham's people. He gets very personal very quickly. And you can imagine he has a lot on his mind. Like, okay, so I'm more talking about he weeps and begins to tell her what's happened. The kiss is that's ancient Near Eastern custom, like that's nothing to overthink about. But again, even though he's been given the blessing, he has the birthright, he has nothing with him. He's had to leave his mother and father's home. He's been fleeing for his life, so he has a lot going on. We already talked about Laban's hospitality. So verse 14, Laban said unto him, surely thou art my bone and my flesh, and he abode with him the space of a month. So once again, Laban is being very hospitable, and he was back with Isaac's servant. Isaac's servant did a nice thing, or no, he didn't do a nice thing. Rebekah did a nice thing watering the camels. After they had that exchange, Laban was the one who said, like, where is this guy? You got to bring him in the house. We'll take care of the camels overnight. We'll give him food. And so Laban is once again being very hospitable. Also, he does know, okay, it's his sister's son, it's his nephew. He also knows that Jacob should be heir to a lot of stuff. I mean, maybe you could say he wouldn't know that immediately because Jacob's not the firstborn, but it would quickly become apparent, you think, especially as we're thinking about some of Laban's motives. Jacob is heir to everything that Isaac owns. It would probably come up, just as we're thinking about Laban. Verse 17, Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Now, there's some disagreement on the Hebrew with that. It's not a normal phrase that's used. Some people suggested that it actually is referring to the state of her eyesight. That seems unlikely. It seems to be a nice euphemism. You don't get the impression she's not a hideous elephant man type person. Just when they compare the two, you kind of get the impression Leah is, I guess we could use the word like plain, and Rachel is described as just very beautiful. So, verse 18, Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. So this is a lot, as we have mentioned many times. 7 years is a lot. Now, what he's doing basically functions as a dowry. Okay, so dowries get confusing because Roman dowries were different than the Hebrew dowries, so it would be very common in the ancient Near East. The man would give some large price for the woman to the family. And the main thinking is, especially just the way those agrarian societies function, a man and a woman have sons. well, they're going to work the field, they're going to do industry, they're going to take on the trade of their father, and theoretically add to the wealth and status of the family, potentially. The women not doing that kind of stuff, it wasn't, you're not going to typically have a female, like, great prolific blacksmith or, just anything like that, just given the time. So someone would pay the family, in a sense, and now it's like a bride price, a dowry. And it was not uncommon to, like, work off a dowry. And sometimes that was even considered a good thing, because then before an actual marriage takes place, the family gets to know that person well and kind of be in the inner workings in industry like that. However, 7 years is extremely generous. That's way more work than you would ever expect for something like that. So it technically wasn't uncommon, but uniquely generous. And Pastor already brought up a lot of the thoughts that I had with what I just call the switch. Okay. So there are a lot of mechanics at play with this. We think it's strange all around, no getting around that. There are a lot of things that have to be in place for this to work. One, Laban has to have the idea to do this. Okay, that's bad enough. And he has decided to not talk to Jacob about this for the last 7 years. Let's pretend that this is like a real custom. Like, oh no, of course, the oldest daughter needs to be married first. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, say that is a real custom in the city of Nahor, okay? I feel like it should have come up sometime in the past 7 years. Okay, so he decides to deceive him in that way. Leah does have to go along with it, just for the plan to work. If she decides to mention something at any point, it's probably not going to happen. And you can kind of speculate, and that's all you can do, as to why she would go along with it. One, much more obedience was expected to a father back then. Like, you're especially, well, in any scenario, like you didn't disobey your parents in orders like this, or like anything. So she has to go along with it to some extent. And yeah, the only explanations that make sense are, it was very customary for a woman to be veiled. Like, so kind of our tradition of like, oh, you can't see the bride in her dress on the wedding day, that kind of thing. Like, you don't see the bride until you're going to consummate the marriage. So she's in a veil. I don't know if they do vows, or I don't know how that works exactly. They do some sort of celebration and ceremony. And then, yeah, I can only guess between veils, wine, and the dark. That's all I got. Go ahead. Yeah, they go. Yeah, the Hebrew's very unclear. But yeah, so no, you're right. It didn't have to be planned from day one. Even tender-eyed people get married, like it. So you never know what's going to happen. But yeah, so the big thing here, and that the irony that should jump out, is Jacob in his life now gets deceived for something that he really cares about. And then you'd think Laban would have given him a deal, like 3.5 years, 50% off this bride price, okay? Like, buy one, get one 50%, something like that. I'm joking a little bit. What's that? Well, no, because he works another 7 years.
Yeah, you think he would have, because he did the switch, he would have.
Yeah.
Let that 7 years go.
Yep, you would think. But no, he does another 7 years, and finally marries Rachel. So I want to read.
Isn't he married her before he does the
Yeah, it
7?
sounds like.
Yeah, they're both married. He's got 2 wives.
Oh yeah, no, there's no doubt about that.
Sure.
And then it serves as something like that.
Yeah, that seems likely. Okay, so I just want to read one verse real quick to set us up, and then we're going to be in your workbook. We're just going to read a short section on page 106. Okay, so the one verse, just hold your spot in the book. The one verse, Genesis 29:31, just to set the scene. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Okay, just setting the scene there. I believe it's towards the bottom of page 106. It's probably the last paragraph. Starts with, God opened her womb because she was unloved, and she ended up, this is Leah, with 6 sons and a daughter. Leah also gave Jacob her maid, who bore Jacob 2 sons. Rachel, being barren, also gave Jacob her maid, who bore 2 sons. Finally, God answered Rachel's prayer, and she bore him a son named Joseph. Jacob had 11 sons total, with another son yet to come. All right, so we will dig into that. I just wanted to give you the very basic so we don't have to spend too much time on every individual verse because we will skip a few things. So we're going to skip the end of the chapter. I mean, if you feel like reading some of this in your spare time, perfectly fine. Through the rest of the chapter, we have Leah's children, the initial children. So most of the names that she gives them end up being attached to basically what she's thinking about Jacob at the time. So she has her first son, she names him Reuben, and it means, like, behold, a son. And her idea was, I've borne him a son, now he'll love me. The next child is Simeon, and it basically means hearing, something like that, because she believes that God has given her this son because he heard her cries that she is unloved in this marriage. The next child is Levi, which means something like attachment, hoping that, I've borne him 3 sons, he'll clearly become like attached to me. And then don't know what's happening with her, but she breaks that cycle with the 4th son, Judah, which just means praise. Okay, so yeah, Leah's in a very tough spot. Obviously, she went along with her father's plan. So that's not great. I mean, she was obedient to her father. That's usually good. Her father was doing something duplicitous. That's not good. But she is in a very tough spot here. She was married off to someone who didn't want to marry her. And now her sister, it's got to be tough enough having there be 2 wives in a marriage, but now it's your sister. And it's the weirdest sibling rivalry you will ever see take place. And it's messed up. Like, it's really messed up. She clearly is not doing well. Like, even just naming the children and her, if you read that for yourself, just everything that happens, she's just hoping that Jacob will value her. So yeah, it's an ugly situation. Now, I do want to read 24 verses in chapter 30. Now, we're not going to say a ton about this. I'm mostly just going to read it. I have a few comments. You can give any thoughts. But it's so strange, their relationship, because we're going to see echoes of, again, like the sins of their fathers and the contentious relationship that Leah and Rachel have with each other being in this situation. So I'll get your thoughts, but Genesis 30, 1 through 24. Remember, Leah has just had 4 children. And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead, who has withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. And Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God has judged me, and has also heard my voice, and has given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again, and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. When Jacob saw that, when Leah saw that she had left off bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob to wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, A troop cometh. And she called his name Gad. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son. And Leah said, Happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher. And Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest, and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them unto his mother Leah. Then Rachel said, Leah, give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes. And she said unto her, Is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband, and wouldst thou also take away my son's mandrakes also? Rachel said, Therefore he shall lie with thee tonight for thy son's mandrakes. Jacob came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him, and said, Thou must come in unto me, for surely I have hired thee with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. And God hearkened unto Leah, and she conceived, and bare Jacob the 5th son. And Leah said, God has given me my hire, because I have given my maiden to his husband. And she called his name Issachar. Leah conceived again, and bare Jacob the 6th son. Leah said, God has endued me with a good dowry. Now will my husband dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. And she called his name Zebulun. And afterward she bare a daughter, and called her name Dinah. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and opened her womb. And she conceived and bare a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, and said, The Lord shall add to me another son. Surprisingly, this is not the most uncomfortable Genesis Bible study we've had this year so far. But yeah, there's a lot. We could have skipped that, thrown it out there. We could have skipped that. We could have summarized that. I wanted you to actually just kind of see the utterly messed up relationship going on here, but there are some very interesting changes from the type of things that we've seen so far. So, weird section of text. What do you think? What jumps out at you? What kind of questions do you have? Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of agency in this story. Yeah, and really, you got to think from last week when his mother suggests, "Hey, you need to steal the blessing." He doesn't say like, "Oh no, we can't do that. That's not right." He goes, "Oh no, I'm not hairy enough to pass for Esau." Like that's he goes along with the things that the women in his life have been telling him, apparently. Yeah, let's talk about mandrakes. Okay, so I was trying to study this, and I am confused. Now, let me tell you just the plain, simple thing. I know that in ancient times and not ancient times, like let's say from the ancient Near East to at least the Middle Ages, probably further. So for like most of history, mandrakes have been very important they are a type of plant. They have like a root system The flower is technically poisonous. People have used these things for like hallucinogens, for all sorts of things. However, mandrake root was always considered good for fertility. Okay, so that's what it was. So I looked up, like, okay, is this just an ancient belief? Like, whatever, like eating a daisy will do this, like, I don't know. Okay. The problem is, I looked at half a dozen websites, and I am not sure if mandrake root actually has some of these properties that they believe it had, or if it's just like a very ancient old wives' tale. I saw one thing that suggested that there were actually fertility helping properties, but it was, I would say back then it was even more ramped up of like a belief, almost like, old wives' tale, like just like, oh, you have mandrakes, now you're probably good, now you're gonna have a child. There may be some scientific backing to it, but I can't really find good information on it for nowadays. Oh, good. Thanks for bringing up the questions that I can answer. Okay. Yeah, no. So you have to read Jesus on marriage. So as he's discussing marriage and divorce laws with the Pharisees, they have questions for him. And him, full knowing the entire Old Testament, he says, yes, these things happened, but it was not always so. And he points back to the garden. And we discussed certain aspects of the design for marriage when we were in the Garden of Eden passages. So he points back to, and this is helpful to do, I think, in many areas, pointing back to God's initial design. He points back to that and shows everything else as derivation from that. And even though God works through and blesses many people doing these things in the Old Testament, it's never approved of. And I think you see that some of those curse aspects playing out in the dissolution of relationships within a family every time this happens. You really don't have an example of it going well. But Jesus, pointing back to the garden, states that very clearly. No, I can't. But I'll address what you're saying. I don't want us to get too far ahead here with, yes, we are noting let's call it the divine irony. I'm not going to sit here and say, because Jacob did this thing, God wanted Laban to deceive. I'm not going to say it's a punishment from God on Jacob. All we can note from what we see in the text, you definitely see irony. Okay, the deceiver was deceived. Yeah, maybe you could say you reap what you sow. I don't know how to play that out. Okay. As far as what Jacob should have done, I don't know. I have thoughts on what I would do, and it's not what Jacob should have done. Okay, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how to deal with this question, to be honest with you. So it is not, okay, as we discussed polygamy, it is not yet law of God that you can't do that. Okay, so it was not God's design, but at this point God has no law against it. I don't know if Jacob is sinning as he marries Rachel, and the text doesn't address that. Even though we watch the pattern of, from Genesis to when Jesus talks about Genesis, we watch the pattern develop and see that it wasn't God's design, but then we see things like this happening. I don't know if Jacob should have not married Rachel. I don't know if, I don't know. Can he have an annulment at that point because it was under false pretenses? I don't know. Like, I can't pretend to know. I know what the text has for us. I know that the story that it's playing out. Beyond that, I don't know that I can speculate as a Christian what Jacob should or shouldn't have done in that scenario. Maybe that's a cop-out. I don't know how to give a good answer to that question. So that's where I'd have to look deeper into this particular situation. So, okay, for example, let's talk about this, because that was actually my first note on this chapter, is that verse 3, we see the first situation with the handmaid. Okay, so Leah has had 4 sons, and it's said that at the end of the 4th son, it said like she seems to no longer be able to have children. Okay, so then Rachel, who has had no children, pulls the Hagar situation and says, here, take my handmaid. And so it's odd that, it's linguistically odd that she says, my handmaid can have a child, that will be mine. But then it refers to the handmaid as a wife. Now, it's weird because Hagar was never treated like a wife from Abraham. And she was just continually abused her entire existence. So the odd thing here is, and I use this in extreme air quotes, we're seeing a successful version of what the ancient Near Eastern custom was. So that's the interesting thing, because you're hearing Rachel say, hey, take my handmaid, and you're going, gosh, I've read this before. But there is no contention that we see in the text like you had with Sarah and Hagar. Now, when it says that he took her as to wife, again, we've discussed, I don't know when, I remember we discussed the Hebrew word wife is woman. Like, so it's his woman, or, the same phrasing goes for husband. It's her man if it's the husband. So I don't know if they count as like legal 3rd and 4th wives respectively, or if they're looped in some unique way because of the role they're fulfilling in bringing children for the initial wives. There's something odd going on, because they do seem to be counted in a sense, but then also we'll see not in a full sense. So there's something odd going on that I don't think we fully understand about how those relationships actually worked out in that time when these things were practiced. We don't have like a clean explanation for exactly how the statuses may have worked when this happened. But yeah, so Rachel ends up being the first one to suggest the handmaid, and like you mentioned, Jacob is on board, and they have a son, Dan. They have a second son, Naphtali. Now, at this point, Jacob has 6 sons. Leah, who had already had 4 sons, no longer can have children at the moment. That's what it seems like. So she says, oh, well, Rachel's doing this handmaid thing. I need to keep the contest going. And she gives him her handmaid, and he has 2 sons by her as well. I did think it was kind of funny in verse 9. Nope, not verse 9. Okay, so verse 10, Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son, and Leah said, a troop cometh, and she called his name Gad. So Gad means something like a troop comes. And I don't know if it's like she has like an army of children now. Like, it's like, oh, a 5th son. It's like your own little army, and she names him Gad. Yeah, basketball team. And then Asher is the next one. So far, Jacob has 4 sons from Leah and then 2 from each handmaid. So then you have the mandrake situation. We explained the mandrakes. And again, just talk about a messed up situation, because they're like, yeah, how do you work out the physical economics of 4 women? So they basically buy the rights to that night. And oddly enough, Leah, who has been stated that she's no longer having children, she ends up having 3 more children. So 2 more sons, Issachar, Zebulun, and the only daughter that we know of Jacob's, Dinah. And then eventually, whenever in the time frame, God allows Rachel to have a son, and she names him Joseph, who we are probably more familiar with than any of the other children. And she hints at some knowledge that she believes she will have another son, which eventually later in life she will. Yeah, so there's so much going on. He now has 11 sons, 1 daughter, and one of the messiest family scenarios I think we've come across.
That was all the boys.
Yeah, a lot of boys there. I don't know. Yeah, you think there'd at least be like a 50-50 split. Yeah, it's doing something. Yeah, so we were going to cover Jacob's wealth and his flight. Shockingly, we did not get through the entire lesson. But we're getting close to catching up to my schedule. We're very close. But yeah, we'll save it for next week, because there are a few very interesting things that I want to get to. Okay, so we have a couple minutes left. How are we feeling about Jacob and his current family relationship thus far? Sad? Okay. Yeah. It is a mess. Yeah.
Stressful.
Very stressful. Yeah, it's the whole situation. Like, and we, someone like myself, I've heard this story since Sunday school, usually in a more watered down version where you're not old enough to really think through the ramifications of any of this. It's different as an adult, and understanding how messed up it is on every level. Okay, Laban, who was awesome, like for the first couple times we met him, is kind of a monster. Like, say what you want about your custom. Okay, you made your daughter marry someone who didn't want to marry her. And not even in the traditional, like, Disney princess type, oh, it's an arranged marriage, and, oh, but she doesn't want to marry him. She wants to be free and do this, and we watch The Little Mermaid. Like that kind of, like, it's not that kind of story. It's like a different, he thinks he's marrying your sister. So that happens, and then he still says, oh yeah, no, you can still marry the sister, and you're like, this is what you're doing to your children. Like, he has severe issues, and they will become more manifest later. I don't know what their relationship was like before these marriages, but going forward, they're not in any sort of good spot for obvious reasons. And yeah, when you're considering, like, okay, is Jacob kind of doing what they want because of how messed up some of this is? We can look back and say certain things are sin, certain things are bad decisions. But like we've said before, use like the handmaid situation is not uncommon in the ancient Near East. The woman he actually loves is not having children, and this is distressing. So like it's just bad on so many levels. But we've seen, the deceiver gets deceived. But interestingly, and we'll dig more into this next week, you can't say that in certain senses he's not being blessed, because one of the things that God has been promising the line of Abraham is descendants. And in this very dark, messy situation, God has given him 11 sons. And they're going to be very important, for the rest of time, okay? If you haven't been recognizing these names as the tribes of Israel, that's where this story is going. The sons of Jacob are a key part of the promises of descendants to Abraham, and tribes and small nation states bear their name for centuries and centuries to come. So God is somehow working through this incredible mess that they have all made as he is being faithful to Jacob despite all of their sin and mistake and misstep and just rebellion and lies and deceit. So even as Jacob is running for his life, God promised to be with him and do all these things and bring him home. So we're watching God's bizarre, what God's doing is not bizarre. God working his good through the sin and depravity of the situations that people get themselves into. And like a lot of the flaws we saw with Abraham, we're watching God use a very messed up person who will eventually be that patriarch of the faith who will become so important. So Jacob is just beginning his journey. God is not done with him. And we're going to watch that unfold, especially next week. Okay? All right. Why don't we close in prayer? Lord, we thank you for this night. We thank you for your word. I just pray that you would help us to consider what you would have us understand about you from this, about how you work in the lives of people. As we look at the life of Jacob and see some things that we maybe shouldn't do, as we look in the future and see admirable things that maybe we should follow. But more importantly, we just pray that we would see you and how you have worked through sinful human beings and how you bring your purposes to pass. So we thank you for your word. We pray you would bring us back safely next week. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.